we've never lived in a better time for an athlete, other than LeBron and Rich Paul or Maverick Carter, these guys that he has around him, or Kevin Durant with Rich Kleiman, or Steph Curry, or Serena Williams. What you see is that the most forward-thinking, innovative athletes are creating a small ecosystem around themselves. They're not part of a big roster of talent. What they want is the best business, media, marketing people around them. And the reality is, if they do that well, they can become, and they are, billion-dollar businesses in their own right.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Be Yourself podcast, the podcast on expressing our true selves with Sergey. Today, my guest is Misha Sher, who's a global head of sports and entertainment at WPP. He's an author, investor, athlete marketing expert. Misha, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
Misha, you have such a prolonged title and so many accomplishments. What are the things that you're most proud of, if you were to pick a few?
Look, I don't know if there's a specific moment. I think I'm most proud of my ability to evolve and to throw myself into different types of opportunities, different environments that perhaps were unfamiliar to me at the time. So that I may have had, whether that's co-authoring a book or traveling the world with Pele, or building this business to where we have where we operate all over the world, where we've won many awards. But I think I'm more proud of what sort of led me there. And, taking chances when at the time it probably seemed maybe a bit far-fetched and a bit scary. So, yeah, I think I'm probably most proud of putting myself in the types of situations that have enabled my career to evolve the way that it has.
I can read on your LinkedIn, with 20 years of experience across North America, Europe, I have built and scaled multi-million-dollar businesses. That's speaking of Misha just being shy a little bit. he's not naming his accomplishments, but negotiated over $1 billion in sports investments and developed high-impact partnership across the NFL, UEFA, which is European football, F1, NBA, and IOC. So, man, that's so many words together that, I got goosebumps, talking about, because I'm a great fan of NBA and I'm into soccer also. So maybe you can tell us a story of how did you came across sports and media, and if you were if you got this understanding that you want to connect your life with this industry when you started.
Yeah, sure. Look, I didn't start my career in this space. So I am, in my past life, I was a player. I was a professional soccer player, not for long,
really?
but that's what I wanted. That was my ambition. This was early, sort of late 90s, early 2000s. At the time when I was in America, those opportunities to play professional football weren't the same as they are now. So I played, when I did play, it was quite underwhelming for me. So I ended up
in the US. You tried to build a career.
Yes,
correct. Which at the time it was a pre-Beckham era.
It was a pre-Beckham era. Yeah. So Major League Soccer had been going for about 4 or 5 years. It wasn't doing very well at the time. There were only 8 teams in the entire country, right? So unless you were an international for the U.S. national team or for another national team, it would have been difficult to make a roster. So I ended up playing in a division below, which was called the A League at the time. But it really wasn't at all what I was aspiring to do. Once I ended up there, I thought to myself, remember looking around the locker room. I remember looking at a captain who probably would have been 10 years older than me and thinking, I don't want to be that guy, right? So again, with all due respect, I mean, people have their own goals and ambitions and so on. It wasn't mine. It wasn't really what I had in mind. So I ended up going for the first, when I retired, I went into banking for 5 years. I moved to Boston and got a job in banking. And because I actually never really thought about what I wanted to do, to be honest, beyond playing, because playing football was always a constant from the time I was a young kid. But my degree was in economics and marketing, and I ended up going into, as you do, you've got to get a job and you've got to start somewhere. And I found that experience very interesting, because I think when you're on that, looking back, especially when you're on that, and I've mentioned so many people now, when you're on your career journey and you're trying to figure out sort of what really feels like it's yours and where do you really thrive and what are you good at, what moves you, I think it's equally as important to figure out what isn't for you. Right. So I think I had that experience going to university when I first went to a much bigger school and in a particular part of the country. And I was like, okay, that's not what I'm looking for from that experience. And that sort of shapes where you go next. So I think oftentimes we focus so much on having a positive experience, on really finding your niche. But I think in at least in my career, in my life, I found that working out what I don't want was almost as important or equally as important as what it is that I didn't want. I actually think I worked out what I didn't want a lot earlier than what I actually wanted out of my career. So I was in Boston for almost 5 years and working in banking. And again, I had these moments where I would look around the office and I think, I don't want this. I don't want this to be my life.
How soon did you realize, like at both places, did it take a while for you to wrap your mind around this realization?
It didn't take me long. I mean, I knew that that world, so I guess I don't want to say a corporate world, but I think the world of finance just wasn't something that excited me. Right? Is it something I could have done? Absolutely. Is it something that excited me, that made me feel alive when I was at work, that colleagues could see that I was really enthused by the work and I wanted to grow and I wanted to evolve? No, I was prepared to do my job, and that's about it. And I think that's
9 to 6, go home.
Yeah, whatever the hours were, and I was diligent in that. But I could tell that something was missing. I could tell that I had more of an entrepreneurial spirit. I was much more, I was missing the relationship piece, going out, building relationships, and being in an industry that I was genuinely interested in. And it wasn't obviously banking or finance. So, a very random story, but I was driving home one day from work, and I was talking to a good friend of mine from university, and we were catching up about our friends and what's everyone doing. And he mentioned that one of our former teammates was in Liverpool doing an MBA in football industries. And I thought to myself, I must have misheard what he said, because I think he said
like mergers and acquisitions.
No, no, not mergers and acquisition. I'm saying like a business degree to work in the business of football, right? So, and this was early, like for context, this was mid 2000s, so 2004, 2005, and this is when the football industry was really starting to take off as a business, right?
Wow.
I think now, obviously, it's become a massive business, not just football, but everything, all sports. But at that moment in time, 20 years ago, it wasn't the same. In particular, global football industry wasn't what it is today. not from sponsorship, not from media rights, not from club ownership, not from anything. That what Manchester United were doing things that were very innovative, but no one else was on that journey really. So when I found out that this type of degree exists, it's like a light went off. I thought, that's it. That's what I need to be doing. There's a business. I'm not playing football, but I can work. I can make a life in this business, in this industry.
Wow.
Now, what that will be, I don't know. But I love football, and the opportunity to go, to go and study and to network and to really get myself immersed in that industry was incredibly appealing. So fast forward over the coming sort of 6 to 9 months of me traveling out to England, to interviewing and applying, and then quitting my job, and
wow.
And everything else, to basically moving over, dropping everything I've ever known, and security and my car, my house, my job, and coming halfway across the world because I felt that it was the right thing to do. I had no idea what was going to happen. I literally landed there with 2 suitcases, look left, look right, went to, look for a place to live. And, that was the beginning of a journey, right? So, and I think every journey starts somewhere. It starts with, you got to put your shoes on, you got to make a move, right? So, that's
how old were you at the time?
I was 26, I think.
Okay.
26, 26, 27 at the time. Yeah.
Not exactly a spring chicken. So you're already established. You had some life already set for you in America, and you changed everything.
Correct. Yeah. Well, it was a life. I felt like it was someone else's life. It wasn't a life for me. And again, I think there are many wonderful people who love that line of work, and they do very well in it. And I think that's why they thrive. I think it's because it's something that they enjoy, or they find another motivation that keeps them in it. It wasn't there for me. So I had to go and find something else, hopefully listening to my heart, and going into spaces that I felt were
following your passion,
were best suited. I think there's it's interesting because in recent years, I've thought about this a lot over, not just in recent years, over the years, whether it's following your passion, because we all have passions. You might have a passion of, I don't know, of playing in the NBA, right? And that's just not. And I don't know how good you are in basketball, but I'm not sure that's possible. I think it needs to be. Well, in an ideal world, it would be something that you have a passion for, but it needs to be something that is aligned with something that you're actually good at, right? So, sometimes people get a little bit too caught up in the passion, just say, this is what I really, really love. And that's great. I think in an ideal world, we would all be doing something that we love. But I think you also have to ask yourself the question, given where you are and what you're good at and who like those types of things, is it, where is the intersection of a lot of those things? And I had a passion for, to work in the football industry, but I also understood sort of what I was good at, whether that's relationships or negotiating or building, where would be the types of places where I can deploy that skill set, which would bring out the best in me and the best in the companies that I was working with. Again, that's, I think, is another lesson I've sort of learned along the way. Is we often talk about sort of our strength and weaknesses and how you've got to work on your weaknesses. And I just think, again, this is my personal opinion, I think you will always have something that you can work on, right? I mean, you should absolutely improve on things that are, that you perceive to be your weaknesses. But I think it's much more important to really, really lean into your strength, because all of us, I believe that all of us have something that is unique to us, particular skill sets or particular characteristics that are, let's just call it your sort of your superpower, right?
Yeah.
When you are doing that thing, you are better at that than most of the other people that you're around.
Yeah.
I think
Playing to your strength.
it's much more. We see that in the context of sport, right? We don't have. You're not trying to get Thierry Henry to play, to be a box to box player or to be defensive midfielder. Like, we don't need him to do that, right? In that, in the Invincibles team, you had Gilberto Silva, who had very different skill set, who can do that, right? And Thierry Henry or Pele or people like that, they can focus on the things that they're good at, right? So, and I think it's important for us as individuals to work out what is it that we're good at, and where does that where does that skill set where is it best deployed in an industry or spaces that we are passionate about. That could be music, that could be film, that could be sport, that could be business, it could be a number of things. But if you might love sales, right? You love sales, or you love account management. You're great with people, or you are, introvert and you like numbers. Whatever that is, there's none of these things are good or bad. It's just that when you work out what it is, be the best in the world at that thing. That's kind of that's my advice.
Yeah, I totally agree. The intersection of what you love, or at least like, and what you're good at, right, is the perfect spot. And on weaknesses, I agree. And I know there is, I've just watched this interview by Pavel Durov from Telegram. And he said an interesting thing, that weaknesses and strength that don't exist. Like, it all depends on the context. Like, even my weakness of being lazy can be, an asset in certain circumstances. So every single,
Yeah.
So it's a really powerful point. So you're able to flip your life around, change the weather, basically come to Liverpool, and from that point forward, it was a love affair, right?
Absolutely. I was living in a country that I felt very at home. I love Europe. I feel European. Maybe it's because of where I was raised, and there's probably a lot of that in me. And yeah, I mean, I as a kid, I never dreamt about working in football. I mean, unless you're a coach or a player, you just didn't think that there were those types of jobs. And now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And I've been lucky to have been part of it for better part of more than 20 years now. So it's, I did feel right at home. And I think, when that happens, you're able to move and navigate your way sort of much easier, because there's a sense, there's a feeling in your head and your heart that you're in the right place. And I think when that's the case, you show up in the right, you end up being in the right rooms, you show up in the right way, you have the kind of energy that people respond to, because that's where you're, because you're in your habitat, right? So, and that's where you come to life. And that's what I found in different roles over the last sort of 20 years.
Can you tell us some stories? First and foremost, for a layman, can you explain what you do?
Sure. Well, what I do now is I run a sport and entertainment marketing business, which sits within a big media and advertising group, right? So, in layman's terms, let's just call it sports marketing. You see companies from all over the world, no matter what sport you're watching, Formula One or NBA or football, rugby. You see companies all around: Heineken, PlayStation, Coca-Cola, Budweiser, Adidas. We work with these companies to help them navigate the world of sport and help them invest in the right areas in the right way, so they can connect, they can leverage the power of sport to connect with consumers. Mm-hmm. That's in the simplest way possible. It's an industry that invests billions of dollars, and we help clients navigate to make sure that, given the people they want to speak to and what they want to say and when they want to say it, that we are able to align with the right types of opportunities wherever they may be. I guess it could be football, it could be basketball, it could be tennis, golf, but help them ultimately connect to consumers through sport.
And what are some common misconceptions that you meet from both ends? Maybe something that our audience, being on both ends, would benefit understanding.
Look, I think the misconception is, one of the misconceptions is that it's that companies, that these brands, that they're not very, that they're all looking for exposure, right? It's kind of, I think it's probably the most simplest one, is that when you look and say, oh, well, they've got exposure, that you're seeing their logo and things like that. The reality is it's an important element, but it's just one small element of why they do what they do. Because you can get exposure in all sorts of environments. You can be on a billboard, you can be in a magazine, you could be, you could see the brand in, all sorts of different environments. It's about, sort of, for a lot of these companies, it's about how they actually embed themselves in the emotion experience that someone is having, right? Because when I'm walking down the street in London and I'm just looking up at the billboard, I have a very different frame of mind than I would be if I'm watching the Super Bowl, right? And my emotional state, my the ability to interact with me, to drive sort of affinity and trust and consideration. Like it's a totally different state of mind. And I think the brands are becoming much more sophisticated in how they do this. And again, like this is how do they beyond the logos, how do they leverage the power of IP to create something that harnesses the power of that brand? Because that's what most companies, that's what they want, right? Coca-Cola, as amazing as they are, doesn't have what the Premier League has, right? Heineken, as cool as they are, don't have what Formula One has, right? So it's those kinds of things. And increasingly, as this industry evolves, the way in which those types of partnerships come to life is becoming a lot more complex.
Also, what I wanted to ask, because we see right now LeBron James is in the final years of his career, and he started a podcast, and he's got his own media company called Uninterrupted, and he's also got this agent who was just his friend named Rich Paul.
Yeah, it
seems to me that players are becoming their own house names. So maybe you can first, in whatever order, talk about athletes and their empowerment, and as far as creating, these type of brands and agencies, and maybe some stories from your WPP where everything worked really well and maybe was even surprising that it worked so well.
Sure. Well, let's start with your second question first. I think it's a space I know. This is a space I've been in for many years, and I know quite well this around sort of athlete marketing and building a brand or building an enterprise around individuals. We've never lived in a better time for an athlete We never have. There was a time, let's say 20 years ago, when the likes of Michael Jordan were around, or David Beckham. And the reality is that in those moments, even though they had the profile and they were incredible athletes, you needed the media, traditional media, to make them as big as they were, right? So if traditional players didn't want you or didn't like you, you couldn't circumvent that, right? That became the narrative. Whereas now, the ability to create the narrative, create your own story, reinforce that through the partners and the places where you turn up, and perhaps the products that you create is far bigger. And the barrier of entry for that, as we by the time we finish this conversation, is becoming lower and lower. Launching your own podcast, creating reformatting things into clips, being able to have presence across YouTube and Instagram. And it's incredible. It's really interesting. And I think what you mentioned is an interesting trend, because other than LeBron and, Rich Paul or Maverick Carter, these guys that he has around him, or Kevin Durant, with Rich Kleiman, or Steph Curry or Serena Williams, what you see is that the most forward-thinking, innovative athletes are creating a small ecosystem around themselves, right? So they're not part of a big roster of talent. They're not. What they want is the best business, media, marketing people around them. And the reality is, if they do that well, they can become, and they are, billion-dollar businesses in their own right. I mean, you see, the Kelsey brothers, they've got a podcast. I mean, it's really fascinating. And I think for the moment, it's almost entirely, with maybe a few exceptions, it's almost entirely driven by the U.S. market. You don't see much of that. I look at the world of football, your soccer, and you'd be hard-pressed to find that kind of innovation and expertise. Yeah, I think this is what I would, just in case, what I was saying is that this is almost entirely a North American-driven trend. And I think it's, probably because those athletes, because the proximity to each other, are a lot more interested and a lot more motivated, I think, to create something that is bigger than their careers. I don't see much of that in outside of US, not yet, and I think that's a big opportunity. Mm-hmm. So I think it doesn't surprise me that LeBron has continued to expand. I mean, what's important is that he has built that foundation over many, many years, right? He has always been more than an athlete. They build uninterrupted over the last probably 10 years, if not more. I could be wrong. I don't have it in front of me, but it's some of the best, some of the most progressive athletes are building something whilst they're at the very top. When they can get into, when they have access, when they have, when they've got they got the attention on them, because we live in a world where once you're done, you're done. Yeah. So there isn't going to be much interest if you haven't built a platform through which you can grow for the next 20, 30 years. And many of these athletes will retire by the time they're 32, 33. Maybe they'll play a few extra years, but that's, that you have another 30 years to live. So that'd be and
I think I saw on your Instagram that it's a dreadful stat that 70% of NBA players go broke like in 5 years after they finish their careers, having millions of dollars, which is crazy.
Correct. Because they think that money will always be there. And what they should be doing is starting to think about what's, and it doesn't have to be a distraction, but it has to be like, how am I leveraging this moment? How am I leveraging the access that I have? The fact that, we're playing in Bay Area, the fact that I could potentially go and meet with the CEO of Oracle or what, things like that. How many of them are thinking like this and getting themselves in the right rooms and having those types of conversations and have one eye out on how to actually build rather than playing video games and go shopping outside of the games. So that's the answer on the talent. And you were asking, what was your other question?
The other question was, what were some surprising results that you were able to get for your customers on both ends? Or not even surprising, but what keeps surprising you that, it works over and over and over again? Maybe for some athletes who don't even know about these opportunities.
I mean, look, I don't know. We could talk about specific examples, but I'd rather not just in case. But if you're talking about athletes in particular, but I think what has surprised me with some is to the earlier point I was making is that on one hand they want to grow. They say they want to grow. They actually say, we want to be like LeBron James. We want to be like Serena Williams. Okay. If you want to be doing the kinds of things that those guys are doing, particularly outside of their sport, then here's what's required to be able to reach that level. Because it says much work, the work that is taken for you to achieve those sort of heights in your particular sport, the diet, the sleep, the training, all the sort of small details that add up to you being an elite athlete, as opposed to someone who's not an elite athlete. There is a misconception that just happens on its own. When it comes to business.
Yeah.
You say, well, I'm famous, therefore it doesn't mean anything. The reality is that you can be famous and you can be an amazing athlete, but it doesn't translate necessarily into anything that you can build off the court or off the pitch. It takes work. It takes commitment. It takes diligence. It takes time. It takes putting the right sort of people around you, not people who tell you what you want to hear, but people who have experience. You want to build a YouTube channel, bring people into your ecosystem who have done that before.
Yeah.
You want to build an audience on social media, bring people into your ecosystem that have done that for other talent. It's, I think if you, again, if they were to approach their career off the pitch in the same way that they would on the pitch, they want to get Ronaldo's chef. They want to get Sergio Ramos's trainer. They want to get, you know what I mean? Because they look around and say, I want that guy and I want that. Of course. And it's the same. It should be the same kind of thinking, off the pitch. So I think the ones, the talent I've worked with that understand that and they put the time in and they invest in they see the long-term opportunity. They're not looking at short-term wins. They're looking at ultimately how is everything that they do builds to something that they want to become. So, and I think that's that's the difference between clients who end up doing really well, again, over time, and the ones that, maybe capitalize on something that's happening today, but that fades and there wasn't anything built in the moment. So there's nothing to sustain going forward.
I mean, this is the type of forward thinking that I think truly few of us inherit or nurture, because it's really difficult. Not because if you, as a world known celebrity, it's difficult to think about tomorrow. When I think, and you mentioned video games, I saw in this Netflix documentary that Anthony Edwards just plays video games all day long, whilst NBA wants him to become the new face of the NBA. So you got to change something to do that. You have to rise up to the challenge.
Absolutely. You have a short moment in time to do that. You've got to do it.
To wrap up, the last word of wisdom and maybe inspiration for all the people who haven't yet found something that feed their soul, feed their pockets, something, because there are a lot of lost people right now. And I started this podcast trying to help myself 5 years ago, because I was really lost till I was 30 years old in my life. So what is your tip of advice for all of us looking for themselves?
Look, I think my biggest advice is take it easy on yourself. I think we're often, there's so much pressure from around, because there's this, again, I go back to maybe my earlier point, that by a certain age or by a certain time, or given what your friends and whatever your family are doing, you should have done X, Y, and Z. Irrelevant. It's completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter. So, I think it's really everything, our success and our journey is really determined by our frame of mind, right? And how we think. And if you spend time and energy thinking about what you could have done and what someone else is doing and how you're doing it in relation to society's expectations or your parents' expectations, or compared to your friends, it's not a healthy way. It's not a healthy way to live. Some people figure things out at 30. Some people then reinvent themselves at 42. Yeah. Some people reinvent themselves again. And we're living in a world where things are constantly changing, right? So you have a job and a career, tomorrow it could be something else. And I think you've got to be open to the idea that whatever happens, you will work it out. It's not a straight line. There'll be some good days. There'll be some bad days. I think that's quite interesting. I've had times when I've taken jobs and all of a sudden, everything sort of falls through. It's all part of a journey. And again, you don't get too high about the highs. Don't get too low about the lows, and just, put one foot in front of the other. And so long as you feel that you're doing something every day, whether that's meeting somebody, listening to something that might be interesting, learning a new skill, if you feel like you're doing something that is progress, then you're doing well. And don't overcomplicate it.
Cool. Thank you, man.
Thanks for having me.
You're looking for a quality video production provider? Look no further. My name is Sergey and I own Beverly Production. We are a video production agency from Ukraine. We help entrepreneurs to create credible online, offline podcasts and clips that drive interest, to promote your podcast. As a podcaster myself, I early realized that there are not that many podcasts that put an emphasis on quality and creativity, just making your videos look really, really cool. That's why we mix our videos up with different visual aids, sound effects, flashy transitions. We do dynamic switching and other cool creative things that just set apart your podcast from your competition. You can check our samples on the website, and we also help people to post the videos. So we take over YouTube management, and we can also run TikTok and LinkedIn for you. So if you're interested in something of this kind, don't hesitate to book a call with me. The contacts are available on the website. Thanks a lot.